Hey folks, before we get to the episode, I want to invite you to this month's International Directors Meetup, our monthly gathering of directors and theater makers from around the world. It's a space to share experiences, trade advice, and find support in what can often be a pretty isolating role. You can come and go as you need, drop in late, leave early, whatever fits your schedule. It's simply a chance to set aside time each month to sit alongside others who understand the work. For dates, times, and details, head to boardofdirectors.world and pull up a chair at the table. Join the board. I have to admit, I was kind of a little shit in undergrad. I came from a performing arts high school and I knew everything. I did a 30-page report on the group theater for fun, and I was reading Stanislavski at 13. So showing up to my freshman year in college, you couldn't tell me anything. Heavily influenced by my teacher in high school, I was taught to look down on musical theater, to think it wasn't serious art, and those who did it weren't serious artists like me. And today's conversation is with Joe Deere, who was actually my professor in undergrad, and secretly I really wanted to be in his production of Assassins. And I had to beg my way into his parade. Because he literally wrote the book, Directing in Musical Theater. And he's been shaping how directors think about storytelling and collaboration ever since. I wish I'd known then what I know now. How generous, rigorous, and genuinely brilliant he is. So this conversation feels a bit like coming full circle. Reconnecting with one of the teachers who helped set me on this path, even when I didn't realize it at the time. Joe, I cannot tell you how surreal an experience this is for me to have you on the podcast and speak with you 22 years later, which is a theme, it seems, in the podcast recently of reconnecting with old friends and mentors. But even 22-year-old me back then had such a feeling about musical theater and musical theater directing that I owe you an apology. I owe you a huge apology, and I wish that I was a better student for you and a better actor and a better performer for you.
I don't remember you not being.
Well, I'm glad.
But you know what you thought at the time. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, I should say that I had been trained in a performing arts high school that made musical theater the lesser of the art form.
Wow. I had no idea because I know where you went, and
Yeah.
I always thought that was a big deal for them.
Well, it was for the other side, but the drama people were very, very serious, and we were told it was flash and trash. And
Yeah.
that's the attitude that I came in with. And
Yeah, but musical theater can be flash and trash. It's first I'll say, I never got anything from you that made me think you were less respectful. And we did
Good.
parade together, right?
We did.
Yeah, which was, literally set in your backyard.
Yeah.
That was an amazing experience to have all you kids from Cobb County there who literally grew up driving past the tree that Leo Frank was hung on, or
Yeah.
the spot where it was.
Yeah.
On your way to school. That just blew me away. But this thing you're talking about regarding attitudes toward musical theater, um, I think musical theater, it's like all theater, it's like all drama, or all, this thing of like embodying other people in stage, on screen, and voice acting, whatever. It can either be really great and incredibly human, or it can be pretty low rent. But there is also just the simple factor of, joy is a legitimate human experience, and joy and frivolity and recognizing the folly of our endeavors. That's a legitimate thing. I remember once I was doing a production of Crazy for You, which is this Gershwin musical, and it's very straight up entertainment and pretty well crafted. I mean, the music is great. It's Gershwin, but the orchestrations and the script is written by Ken Ludwig. And so, when it's supposed to be funny, it's actually funny. And the shaping of the, rising action and all that is really good. But I had students who at some point said, this is just fluff. And I said, yeah, well, it is actually supposed to be diversion and it's supposed to be entertaining. I said, but let me just tell you something that I know to be true. There's a woman out in that audience tonight who has very serious cancer. And I knew this to be true. I said, she's here to get a break from the things that are making her desperately afraid. And if her having 2.5 hours vacation from her paralyzing anxiety is something we can provide, do you think that's a good enough reason? I mean, is that a good enough reason to do what you do? In the world we live in right now, which is a very fraught place, you're allowed to have periods of escape. That doesn't, I don't personally think sticking your head in the sand and walking away from it and just saying, I can't even. I don't think that's a responsible way to respond to it. But I also think gnashing your teeth 24 hours a day and becoming sort of fossilized with anxiety, I don't think that's the right response either. We do need to keep living. And so that's sort of what I think about the idea of sort of frivolity. Flash and trash, I like flash because I appreciate effective use of spectacle, but that can be a lot of things, right? The trash part of it, I don't care so much for because I think of that as hollow manipulation. I like amazing manipulation. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to be able to dazzle people if you do it right. So, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between Cirque du Soleil and Jubilee, and they're both in Las Vegas,
Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about making work right now.
Yeah.
It's not all distraction. There are incredibly deep musicals that, obviously without saying, Pulitzer Prize winning musicals that, are better and more crafted and will be seen by more people than
a lot
Pulitzer Prize winning plays. Exactly. But does it, and this is, so for instance, I'll just tell the story of, I've directed 2 musicals and I completely understand the joy of that process. That process is, I've directed 50 plays and I've directed 2 musicals, and those 2 musicals they were the most fun I've ever had. But I did Pajama Game and then I did Cabaret.
Wow,
so
those are very different, right?
Exactly. Diametrically opposed. Same.
Although, interestingly, they were only written about 8 years apart from each other.
Exactly.
They're very, very close in period.
And with Fosse, being
integral to both of them, really,
Yeah.
I mean, very different times in his life. He did the film, but those are 2 very different kind of musicals. And they could not be more different in sort of what they set out to do.
Yeah. So then you've got, Beetlejuice and you've got Next to Normal. And it feels like in a way that, and tell me I'm wrong, obviously I'm here to, you literally wrote the book on that. So it's okay to, I love being challenged and corrected as well. It feels like the musical theater has that world that is so Beetlejuice to Next to Normal, where straight drama doesn't have that.
Well, you're talking about the gamut of experience from something that is really meant to be a piece of pure frivolity. John Lahr, who's a great theater writer and critic and so forth. I think he used to write for the New Yorker. I don't even know if he's alive, but Bert Lahr was his dad. The guy was the Cowardly Lion.
Yeah.
And he has this phrase that he said, which I quite love. He said, "Frivolity is the species' refusal to suffer." And I'm like, yes, thank you very much. And this is why the Marx Brothers are still valid, right? And so is Nate Bargatze. And so is, when Saturday Night Live lands a sketch It's amazing. But we do have in theater, okay, so if we're talking about theater performance, you do still have things that are pretty silly, like the play that goes wrong and all
Yeah.
that whole sort of
Yeah.
chain of things, or something like the 39 Steps,
Right.
which I saw in New York, and it was I had big director envy when I saw that because I'm like, it was so well done,
Yeah.
she just killed that thing. It was just so beautifully crafted moment to moment and imaginative and funny. So I think you have stuff that lives on that side of the spectrum. And then you have things that are much more serious, like, Brandon Jacobs Jenkins has had a fantastic run of really good, successful commercial pieces. I saw The Comeuppance just a few months ago. That's very serious drama and it's contemporary. And I saw Sarah Ruhl's Eurydice. They did a revival of the original production of it, which was
Mm.
maybe 20 years ago
Yeah.
at an off-Broadway theater with Brian Darcy James in it.
Mm.
So that is both contemporary realistic drama that hits the nail on the head, and then something that's about as poetic as you could. It's like really Eurydice lives in a space that is as poetic a kind of drama as I have ever seen written in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think that there's room across the spectrum for all of it. And in the same way that we're gonna want I like Thai food, but I don't eat Thai food every night,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so I think if we're gonna, we can talk about the challenge of commercial theater and all that stuff. But if you're in a situation where you're able to pick from a range of pieces and you can go see more than one thing a year, which is a lot of money, right? I think there's room for all of it. There is room for all of it. And so when you're a freelance director, you're really a hired gun in a lot of ways. And I'm 63 and I am still promoting myself to new theaters. I have a website for the purpose of hustling my various things that I sell, right? I sell directing services, I sell workshop services, I sell a few other things. I'm a service provider, and I know that sounds gross, but that is the fact of what we do. If
That's
you're
what
a
we do.
freelance
Right.
artist, you're
Yeah.
you're a service provider. And so theaters hire me because they either know by my reputation or they know because they've worked with me that I can do certain things well. And among those are marshaling huge resources of people, and the mechanical parts of what makes a musical happen. And that's a lot, because of
Yeah.
Pajama Game and Cabaret. That's a lot of stuff and people to deal with. And it takes a kind of a knowledge base of lots of technical things that go into it. But it's also, you have to know how to speak the various languages that, like, if you're going to do a musical that's got 15 locations, and you mentioned Beetlejuice, those shows, Beetlejuice and these movies that are turned into musicals, and that's been for decades and
Yeah.
decades and decades. But really, in the last 30 years, we've been having things like, I don't know, I directed Mary Poppins 2 times in 1 year, and both of them
Wow.
were because I was a hired gun.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, huge show that I think suffers from lazy writing, because why do we need to have a scene that's 4 minutes long in one location and then go to another location? That's really, that's just not well crafted, that you need to change a location every 5 minutes in a drama. Write better, find a way for it to, like we're talking about Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. His shows all take place in a single location. Well, not all of them, but lots of them. And the more recent ones are in a single location. And the location, the pressure of that's all super valued. But if you're going to be a hired gun to do musicals, you sort of have to know how to deal with all that crap that goes with it. So the directing of the actors, the crafting of the physical piece in a space, in a rehearsal space, that in some ways is about 25% of the job. And the other 75% is all that other stuff. So, yeah.
I mean, these Mary Poppins. I'm not sure when did they write that
As a stage piece,
yeah.
golly, I bet it was about 20 years ago,
Do
and
you
it was in London, right?
yeah. Do you think part of that, and this could be true for plays as well, but I know it's true for movies. Do you think it's about attention span? That it's just, a worry of like if we don't keep them on the edge of their seat, if we don't keep them moving forward, then they might get tired of it. They might check out.
Yeah, that might be part of it. I also think there's an kind of a tacit understanding that when you're gonna put a famous movie on stage, you have to replicate
Yeah.
set pieces from it, right? So,
Right.
like, I spent about a year and a half in my 20s touring with Singing in the Rain. It was the first national tour of Singing in the Rain. So guess what had to happen is the
Yeah.
guy had to sing and dance in the rain,
Right. Of
and it
course.
was literally as close to the movie as they could make it. So he did the exact choreography. His costume was meant to look exactly like Gene Kelly in the movie. The set was essentially a stage. It had to be shrunken down because that was a big outdoor sound stage, or a big outdoor, studio location. But they did everything they could to make it as close to the movie as possible. Movies typically, and especially the kind of movies that are adapted to musicals, there are a million locations, and of course they are. So I think that's part of it. But you know what else I think it is? So your attention span point is a good one because I think that these mega musicals, and Mary Poppins is one of those Disney properties. And I've directed a lot of those as well, because I deal with youth theater sometimes. There's an organization that I love that I work with called the Muse Machine here in
Muse
Dayton.
Machine. Yeah, I remember.
And they're wonderful and they really serve kids beautifully. But I direct a big winter musical for them. We're just about to, well, we're finishing casting in the next couple days. But um, eh, there is a thing that Disney has pioneered, and they're a big monster in the room, right? They sort of define things so that even though Wicked isn't a Disney musical, it's got that about it. Even though Anastasia isn't a Disney musical, but it may as well be.
May as well be.
There's this thing that you have to have enormous spectacle. I mean, the kind of spectacle that you would expect in Las Vegas or something like that
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
is on a Broadway stage, and then it's gonna tour. And of course, they know Broadway, those houses are smaller. They might seat a maximum of, 15 or 1,800, but then when you go and tour around to Winston-Salem or Cincinnati or Dayton or wherever, Atlanta, you're gonna be in 3,000 seat theaters, and they're gonna pack them in. And so there's an enormous amount of money to be made. They basically say you have to see what you're paying for. And a person like Julie Taymor did it with such imagination. To me, Lion King is the gold standard for
Yeah.
that kind of adaptation.
Let me ask you this then, because I agree. Like Lion King par excellence. Like that's what you want to be aiming to do. And in a way, like, yes, she's having to recreate the film, but also at the same time, it is its own thing. It almost doesn't look like the film. When you are a director that is, I mean, not you particularly, but I mean, in terms of like Singing in the Rain, like if you're the
Mhm.
director of that show, which obviously a phenomenal director of that show, but you're having to recreate the film, you're a reinterpreter, not an interpreter in that way.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, there's no way that your fingerprints aren't going to be on it no matter what you do. You can think that, yeah, this is an interesting thing. I mean, I think it's so fundamental to your ethos as a director that you're not there to do anybody's version of the story, but your own version or yours and your collaborators, right? Your
Yeah,
writers, your musicians, the actors you work with, that you all are creating something that could only ever exist because of that alchemy. So that's one way. And then there's the other way there's an old way of thinking, and it's particularly true of people who direct musicals and not in a thoughtful way. But it's like, well, I'm just going to do the show. I'm just going to do Hello Dolly. Well, yeah. So what does that mean? Well, that means Dolly has to wear a red dress when she cuts the Harmonia Gardens, and Dolly has to walk down a center staircase, and the waiters have to wear little red short jackets. And there's a set of iconography that goes with every production. And so you mentioned Cabaret. The version of it with Alan Cumming, um, that was done as a revival in, I want to say, 90.
Yeah.
94, whatever it was.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was a radical departure from what it had been before. So I have this interesting experience that my wife, who's an actress, singer, and dancer, in 1977, she did a revival of Cabaret with Joel Grey that was directed by Hal Prince. And the choreography was by Ronald Field. It was basically the original Broadway production with a couple of changes. They added one or two songs from the movie, and they rewrote it a little bit so that the central character, Cliff Bradshaw, was bisexual. In the original, he was straight with a little hint that he
Hint.
might have,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then in this one,
Ambiguous.
but in this one, he was bisexual. Oh, it was clear. And then in the later version, this one with Alan Cumming that was Sam Mendes directed, it evolved further that he was gay, but was dabbling with a heterosexual relationship with Sally Bowles. And so it's changed and changed and changed. But the reason that production that Sam Mendes did was such an earthquake in the musical theater, and Alan Cumming was no small part of that. I mean, he's just an enormously good actor, and Natasha Richardson too, is that they had the courage to look at the script and say, what story are we telling? Not how did Boris Aronson design it originally, and that was a brilliant design. How did Hal Prince direct it? Hal Prince directed the shit out of it. I mean, it was fucking amazing to see.
Yeah.
Because I was a stage door Johnny a lot. I saw that show on tour and then on Broadway a number of times because my wife was in it. But I was learning about directing even though I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And I watched what Hal Prince did in terms of stage images and in terms of how he collaborated with Boris Aronson in particular, in terms of crafting the space and how he imagined these characters, because he was powerfully a dramaturg in the way that so that's that's looking at the story with fresh eyes. So many people who direct musicals now, or really almost always, are just regurgitating. They're just
Mhm.
reiterating. And sometimes you're cornered into that because you've rented a set, which I end up dealing with a lot, rented scenery for these big musicals because they're so resource intensive. So when you rent a set, you're painted into a corner. You can only do so much, right? But my much, much preferred way of going about it is that you actually start from scratch and say, I'm going to read this story. And, when we did Parade, I had never seen Parade.
Yeah.
That production was as much an authentic expression of my point of view and what mattered to me. I mean, I'm a guy of Jewish heritage in America, and I grew up in the South. And granted, they weren't lynching Jews in the 1960s and 70s in Florida, but they were also not very tolerant. And there was
Kind.
not very kind, right? And even though I'm not a practicing Jew, I grew up in that world. I mean, my father and mother were a mixed marriage, and so they didn't raise us with any particular religious affiliation. But other people identified me as being Jewish, and so all you need to be is, in somebody's eyes, if you're Jewish,
Right.
they'll treat you the way they want to treat you.
Yeah.
So when I did Parade with you all those years later, I understood on a basic level how Leo Frank was a disenfranchised guy, and it was and plus you guys brought your understanding of what it is to be from Georgia, to be Georgians and all of that. That was rich, but it was a completely from scratch production. And I sat down with the designers and I said, I have this image that we have these old red hills of home, that the hills ramble down toward the front. And as they get further toward the front of the stage, it turns into the brick streets of Atlanta. And then you get to the end of it, and it looks like somebody took an enormous sledgehammer and busted the edge of the streets off. So it was kind of a cliff that broke off into the orchestra pit. That was the image I gave to the designers. And I said, and busting up out of that ground and bricks is this tree that sits over everything. Well, that was just an image that I had, and I expressed it, and the designer really ran with it, and so it's just two different ways of looking at directing.
Yeah.
But I
I
think
re-
that's true about some plays also.
yeah, yes, of course.
Oh,
You get
that's
to,
the way it's done.
yeah,
Yeah.
you rehash that old warhorse, that old chestnut.
Yeah, yeah.
But then you have something like the not recent in past couple of years, Oklahoma, the Daniel Fish Oklahoma, which like completely reimagines it and becomes so relevant for an audience of today. And of course, there's a controversy around that of people wanting the original.
But that's mostly because people are very reluctant to see their sacred cows reimagined, or in that case, some people thought they slaughtered it, right? And so, but that's exactly the situation. You can like what Daniel Fish did with it, or you can not like it. But I mean, nobody got hurt. So what does it matter, right? Like, go see it. And if you want to just go home enraged and grinding your molars over it, you can do that. But that's mostly because you're attached to a worldview that he really challenged, right? That he upset, overturned. And that's that's legitimate too. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But yeah, that's a great example. That's a great example of
Because
somebody having the balls to,
yeah,
see something fresh.
because there were a whole lot of people, myself included, that our experience with it is possibly the movie, and then maybe a production that our high school or somebody has done,
Which would have been a very conventional sort of, of affirming of the status quo.
and so many people not seeing themselves on that stage or in that story or whatever, and then just turning off from it
Yeah.
and ignoring the fact that actually really phenomenal music and there's a really good story in there, and a lot of that kind of South Pacific, incredibly subversive when it came out, but caught in a time capsule that just keeps going forward in time, so we lose that.
I mean, but that's true. And I attribute a lot of that to Oscar Hammerstein those guys were very adventurous. I mean, the idea of Oklahoma on its own, to do a show that's kind of an anti-spectacle, that starts with a guy, you hear his voice off stage while a woman is churning butter. That's no kind of opening number. I mean, the conventional wisdom of an opening number is it has to grab people by the collars and yank them forward and
right.
yell at them about who are these people? What's the central, Hamilton starts with a big opening number that lays out the exposition of the story. That's conventional musical theater.
Yeah.
I hate to tell you, but Hamilton is very, very, very conventional. It's just the medium that he uses to tell the story, and his really brilliant determination that we're going to tell the story of of what these old, well, they weren't that old, actually. They were in their 30s, but these white men who were big landowners, the revolutionaries who started this country, we're going to tell it with basically people who are all overtly, evidently immigrants, or close to being immigrants in some way, or people who were kidnapped and taken here, right, enslaved. That's a courageous thing, but the structure of that piece is very conventional.
Conventional.
No, but Rodgers and Hammerstein were so imaginative. I mean, look, so we're talking about directing. The thing I think, if you're going to make a life as a director, I think you have to be so in love with the idea of theater and with the craft of theater and the way that it's evolved over years. I mean, I study the history of theater and I study these old musicals, not because somebody told me I should, but because I can't help it, right? In your way of creating drama, I mean, I'm assuming it's the stuff that you do keeps you awake at night.
God, yeah.
I mean, isn't that the fun of it, though?
Yeah, it is.
And so everybody, like, if it doesn't hurt you or someone else, which are the two rules that I think, it can't hurt you or someone else, right?
Yeah.
But if it doesn't hurt you or someone else, follow your muse,
Yeah, absolutely.
And God dang it, it's like this thing of being a freelance director makes that hard because you don't get to choose a lot. I mean, I would say, so I've probably directed or choreographed more than 200 productions and events in whatever way that means. But in terms of like conventional, or I'll say like traditional productions, I'm positive 150. Sure. Of that, maybe 15 or 20 of them are shows that I was like, I want to do this. This is on my list to do. Otherwise, Parade was one of those, by the way. But most of them are, well, you got to do it because it's good for the students. Okay, you're right. Yeah. Or looking at selection of shows, what's got good opportunities for our students, what's going to give them a piece of an exposure to a kind of theater that they may, or drama or whatever, that they've not had exposure to, because by the time you get done with 4 years of college, you want them to have had some kind of range of experience. But you don't get to do that as a freelancer. So this thing of figuring out how to like tell a story authentically from your point of view, it's hard.
As a freelancer, or even as, when you're in an institution, you have the kind of the structure and the safety of that. I always talk about with my directing students, but even, in this monthly get together that I have called the board of directors, of talking about what's the kind of person I need to be to go into the room. Like, I have to be that satellite dish that reflects back to, I have to be that first audience. And especially in a musical, like, there's the rehearsal room and then there's all the meetings that have to take place outside of the rehearsal room.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so who do you have to be to come into that room every single day? Like, what is it that you do to
It's
make
such a
yourself
good
that?
question. It's such a good question. I think that in a lot of ways is sort of the question. I'm going to preface this by saying sometimes I'm better than others. And it
Yeah,
is,
same.
you know what I mean? I mean, like,
Yeah.
I try to be, I feel like you have to be so pure of spirit. You're like a knight of the round table when you're going to take on directing any project, and you have to embody the sort of the purest. And I'm not talking about how other people want you to represent, because I'm old enough that I've seen the language that we use to talk about inclusiveness or openness to other ideas or all the things. I mean, their language goes through phases, and there are fads, although that seems dismissive, but I'm not quite sure what a different word would be. But language goes through these phases and it evolves, but it's all trying to talk about the same thing. I have such an allergy to jargon. I can't stand it. I can't stand it talking about theater making. I can't stand it talking about society. I can't, I just, it makes me want to laugh and it makes me want to make fun of it, which is totally a shitty response. But I can't help it, because I think that it is um, giving up your actual expression, right? If you say, we can't say, I love working with these people. This group, I love these folks. I love these guys or these folks, right? And for me, guys is an inclusive term, but I understand it's
Yeah.
gender. But no, we have to say these lovely humans is the new fad, right? Everybody's lovely humans, right?
No, no.
But you know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
look
yeah.
at that and I go, you make me want to laugh at you, because you have abdicated authentic language. You refuse to develop your vocabulary sufficient to express your own ideas. So you're grabbing onto jargon. So and if anybody listens to this, they're going to go, that guy's an asshole.
No, no, no,
You
no,
know,
no.
no, but
You're,
you know what?
you're not the first person. You're not the first person to say this on here of saying, like, we have gone through rightfully a reckoning in the last 5 years, and some really important things have come through, and we're wrestling with them. And also, as is always the case, we have swung the pendulum so far over to the side.
It's very, I mean, if you walk in, and I'm going to get back to your question about how do you navigate this as a person? What do you have to do? But it is, when you're looking over look, Adam, I'm an old white guy and I'm a cis guy, and I'm like, you know, so I represent for some people a lot of the things that are wrong with institutions, that are wrong with established theater, etc., rightly or wrongly. And I have to let other people decide that. And I look deeply into myself and try to be my best self. But when you have to look over your shoulder because somebody's going, oh, he's an old guy, or that's old school, right? These people dismiss you as, oh, he's so old school. What does that mean? I mean, if you're using old school as a pejorative to say this person is uh, a racist, a sexist, or whatever, I don't. That's not true. First, but or dismissing them because they're old, right? You know, like When is somebody too old to be able to have a voice? Right? When is
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
too old? Are you going to, you're telling me that a person who is 75 is too old to be able to speak, to create art? I don't think so. I mean, composers, novelists, painters, they all continue working. Why would it be that a director or a choreographer or an actor or somebody else is not legitimate as they get older? There are plenty old people who go see theater who might want to see a person with their life experience creating the theater, but also one hopes that as you get older, you get some perspective, right?
Yes.
And so maybe what you're bringing to the stage is your perspective of having been 25, 35, 45, 55, 65, and more. So I think that matters, right? And this is not a defense of
No,
somebody
no,
being an asshole, but you know
no.
what I mean, right?
But that's I think that's the false narrative that people associate old with calcification
Yeah,
versus
yeah, yeah.
I've gotten
Intractable.
older and I've gotten more expansive. And we know that there are calcified older people who have not changed. And
Yeah,
I've had, and especially in this industry, we know that there are very, mean, bad, dangerous people who have not
yeah,
expanded. And then we know that there are also those who are like, you know what, I have been around the world and I have made myself decentralized in a lot of spaces and I am open to these things. And
yeah.
also I have a perspective that goes back 60 years, 50
Well,
years, 40 years.
like you can only walk in the room with experience if you've had experiences.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
takes time. I just recently did a play and a world premiere of a play called Dad's Place at the Human Race Theater Company here in Dayton. And I'm a resident artist with them, and I've had so many good experiences with them. But I was in a room that was very interesting, and I've never had this happen before. I was in the room with artists, some of whom I've known for, well, in the case of the stage manager, 37 years. In the case of the scenic designer, 32 or 3. And then one of the actors who you know, Bruce Cromer,
Bruce. Yeah.
I've known him for 29 years, and then another actor for like 15 years, and the playwright probably for 20 years. And so I was in a room full, it was not a, it was a two-person cast, and me and the stage manager and the assistant stage manager, who they were all wonderful people, lovely humans even. But that's me being a cynical bastard.
I
But
love it. Keep it.
but I loved being in a room with people who I could look at and say, we share common life experience outside of our friendships and our work relationships. But we also share the experience of having sat across the table from each other as teachers, having been in the rehearsal room for 5 or 6 plays, or having started our careers together. In the case of the stage manager, she's a couple years senior of me, but we spent our very earliest part of our careers working together in a summer theater. To be in a room with people who you have that common lived experience, and you can look at each other and say, this Kurt Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse-Five wrote about time as this character, Billy Pilgrim, travels through time very fluidly. And that's not an uncommon idea in a lot of storytelling. But the idea that time folds over on itself like a ribbon being unspooled, and that where the ribbon touches itself, time connects again. So this simultaneous experience of being in a rehearsal room with somebody on a play 10 years ago and this moment right now, or being in a rehearsal room 20 years ago or 35 years ago, and then being in the room now and I see them as a 70-year-old and I see them as a 35-year-old or a 25-year-old and all the spaces in between. That's a beautiful thing. It's like if there's anything great about getting old or old, it depends. That's all relative, isn't it? Um, it is that you can have these long life experiences, and when you see somebody, you look at them and it's all there. And I love that. But I want to get back to your question, which was really like, how do you walk in? How do you navigate all of that stuff as a director, all those people, all the kinds of meetings you have to be at and so forth? I think about this a lot because when a production is done, you look at it and you say, oh, so maybe the audience really likes it. So I guess, is that a success?
Mm.
Or sometimes I've done shows where, I mean, I always hope the audience is compelled by it, right? Which is a little bit different than liking it, but compelled.
Speak about that real quick. What the
Okay,
difference
so
between compel and like. That's
yeah.
important.
So compelled, it means I have to pay attention. It demands my attention, it commands my attention, it is worthy of my attention, and I can't not focus on it. I can't not look aw I can't look away, I can't not look at it. As painful as it might be, as beautiful and touching as it might be, um, that to me is what it's all about. It's gotta be compelling. I taught in universities for 28 years and freelanced before that, and I continue to do workshops and coach and all that stuff, and plus as a director with young people you're teaching. The thing that it all boils down to is, like, there has to be life force in it. There has to be life force in it. The people that you're engaging with as artists have to live in this place where when they walk across the threshold of the rehearsal room, that they have said, I'm about to enter a place where it demands of me a kind of a vitality, this life force. Martha Graham told
I love
Agnes
that.
DeMille,
I
this thing
love
about
that quote.
she says
Yes.
there's a quickening, right?
Yeah.
And if you cannot live in that space when you walk in a rehearsal room and make it a habit, you'll not be your best self as a director. And man, I think you have to bring that into the meetings you're in also, and have perfectionism is not very helpful because it implies that you're the only person who has taste, right? That my taste is better than everyone else's. And so it's kind of throwing a tantrum at everybody, saying it's not good enough, it's not good enough, and stamping your
Yeah.
foot. I mean, that's perfectionism in the extreme, but any kind of perfectionism is throwing a tantrum at yourself sometimes, which is not productive. Your frustration at your own inability to express something well or to somehow achieve what you imagine and maybe can't find words for. That's a very common experience for director, right? And of course, as a director, you can't do much except convince people to do something that you're thinking about.
Right.
But you have to have a kind of a generosity, I think, when you go in, but an absolute clear sense of passion and vision, and must be in love with the story you're going to tell. You just have to fall in love with it, even even if it's a temporary. Like I think I talk about, sometimes it's an enduring, lifelong love, like I have with Parade, like I have with Follies, like I have with a lot of things. And then sometimes it's a fling,
Right.
right? And I directed 9 to 5, the musical of 9 to 5, which I actually think has some really good ideas in it. Dolly Parton and Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin were powerfully influential in the making of that. And they had a story about feminism and rising power of working women that I witnessed with my mom, right? And so I have a huge amount of affection for that. But the reality is that was a fling.
Yeah.
I fell in love with it while I did it, and I cared a lot while I did it. But when it was done, I'm like, okay, thanks a lot. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll see each other again.
Sometimes they're Tinder dates. Sometimes they literally are just
That's it.
yeah.
That's
It's
it.
okay.
But there you go, right? So, but as a director, I've worked on shows that I really loved that didn't go as well as I would have liked. And as much as I want to blame other people, and sometimes you don't have the right collaborators, or, well, not the right. You don't know how to work with the collaborators you have, or maybe they're not in a place to bring what they might bring to the table, or whatever the reasons are. I don't know. But sometimes it doesn't go as you would like. And so even if audiences walk away liking it, as a director, the experience of being a director is not just about what were the reviews on opening night. Frankly, you're useless by then. I've done
Yeah.
many, many shows where after opening night, I was on a plane the next morning real
Yeah.
early so that
Yeah.
they could repurpose the apartment for the next person to come in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's like, oh, I guess I won't be seeing that again. But the experience of being a director is what happens in the room. And the room means the rehearsal room, and then the theater space and the meeting rooms. And that is more how I think about my experiences as a director than anything else. I did a show 2 summers ago in Italy, in the south of Italy, in a town called Matera. It was a new play called Bos Laços et Mo, which is it's part of the town motto. And it's really about how this town, which is one of the oldest cities in the world. I mean, it is one of the oldest, most continuously occupied cities in the world. Jerusalem, I think, is one of the other, but this is one of the three oldest. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I directed this piece in a 14th century monastery, in a room in this monastery.
Not a
And then
bad gig.
oh my God, it was incredible. And then we performed it in the courtyard, sort of the terrazzo of the monastery that overlooked an enormous canyon. They called it a gravina, like a ravine. And on the other side of the ravine was this great open plain where they had raised cattle for many, many years. And of course, it was the story was set in that town. And so when they're talking about the gravina, I'm like, yeah, the gravina that's right over there. It was insane. But I didn't know anybody. I went. They asked me, which was a huge risk for them. I went, which was a huge risk for me. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, because I was able to go in and say, I'm going to trust myself, not really speaking Italian. Thank God they had a few people who spoke English, but I had side-by-side translations. It was a very physical piece. And I trusted myself to start in a very naive way and figure out how to find a connection to these people and they to me. And they were nervous too, but it was so beautiful. And that's an example where after it's over, you look back and you say, how the hell did that happen? And mostly because I was able to be my best self. I didn't let myself be corrupted by ego or appetite or whatever. You know what I mean? As a director, theaters trust you with a lot. If you're going to be hired by a theater,
Yeah.
or whether it's your own theater or whether it's a university that you're working for, there's still a lot at stake. Reputation, ticket sales, which means survival, future season ticket sales, which are kind of non-existent anymore, but all that stuff, they trust you with so much. And so when you go in, you sort of have to deliver. And you have to hold that at bay in a way, the pressure of that, but also the understanding that at some point you've got to craft these moments so that they land beautifully. You studied
Yeah.
with Anne Bogart.
Yeah.
And I saw a production she did, I guess it was Bob Rauschenberg USA, is the only production that I saw the City Company do live. And it was so beautifully crafted. So craft for me is the verb I have maybe the most respect for. Because craft means you have the skills and you can employ the skills to make a moment so in such a distilled way, human, deeply human. That's what craft is for me. And that you strip away the stuff that's preventing you from having access to humanity. And humanity means despair. Humanity means idiocy. Humanity means the sort of rapturous experience of new love. Humanity means lust and all the kinds of things, paternal and maternal love and all that stuff. Those are all humanity. And we have to find a way to get to them so that they're potently human, but not live in the land of just being a cliche or regurgitating a trope that points at humanity, but that doesn't really embody or express it. That's fucking hard. You know what? I mean, that is hard work, and it requires everybody, all the artists involved to have their shit together and to have their knives sharp and to be really relentless in their desire to somehow clarify that. Do you know what I mean? And so, you have to build skills over the years. And so when you were a student, trying, just thrashing about in the sandbox, what you knew was that you had humanity that you needed to express. And having the tools to do it comes later. But you as a director, I watch a lot of theater when I can. I see a lot of theater. I see theater's not great, or I see theater that's very amateurish, and then I see stuff that is at the highest level professionally and everything in between. And part of what I'm doing is schooling
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Right? When I saw that Sarah Rule piece, the Eurydice that I saw in New York that was off-Broadway last summer, it was so beautifully done. And there was great stage crafting in it. There was great imagination. That's fucking awesome. That is just awesome. But I looked at that, and on some level, I'm clocking all that stuff, and I have a card catalog of
Yeah.
ideas and experiences and images that you go, oh my God, I don't know when I'm going to get to use that, but I am for sure going to steal that
Absolutely.
because it sings in you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had a student do a piece 2 weeks ago that was so, I don't want to say perfect, but it was one of those things that the very first thought I had was, I don't know how I don't steal that. I don't know how when I am working with time that this piece isn't going to influence me. I don't know how
But
I'm gonna.
why shouldn't it?
Well, just for theft reasons, I don't want to. But our job obviously is to hide where we've stolen all of those things from.
Well,
So,
yeah, but I'm going to tell you, I once looked up the word imagination. I wanted to know what the actual definition was because I was talking to some theater educators at one point. Imagination is rearranging images that exist in a new way. I can't imagine something that has no
experience.
connection
Yeah.
to my experience, right? I could say, tell me about something you've never seen or experienced. You couldn't. You would have to refer to things that are in your argot, in your sort of book. And so there's a difference between empty repetition and appropriation and utilization,
Yeah.
right? And if I say this with slight quotes around it, but only slight, if I'm going to steal somebody's idea, it means I have so much respect for it. Such love. I saw Cirque du Soleil in their first New York performances in this big yellow and blue tent that they had down in Battery Park before Battery Park was all built up. And they had a thing where a guy was a gymnast, and his hands were looped through these big ropes that went up to huge pulleys overhead. And I think they connected together into a single rope. And he was one of those guys that was like an Olympic athlete on the rings or something. So he could keep his arms straight out to the side without buckling like I would. But he somehow got spinning where he ran and he would leap into the air. And as he leapt, there were this group of clowns way upstage that were holding onto the rope. And as he leapt, they pulled the rope back and it hoisted him into the air. And he seemed to be flying, but I could see them pulling him up and lowering him down. And so I simultaneously saw the magic and the means.
Yeah.
And so I did a production of this musical called Big River, which is based on Huck Finn, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. And we needed to move the boat, or this raft that that Huck and Jim are on. We had to move it around the stage, and I said, I know what to do. And so I attached a rope to the corner of each corner of the raft, and I had 4 people, or in some cases more, placed around the stage with big, huge industrial pulleys that looked like they were 19th century wooden pulleys. And the rope was a big, thick, hemp rope. And as the raft needed to move around the stage, one person would would slack out as another person or 2 people pulled it in, and they could move that raft all over the stage in any position we wanted because they got good at it. Well, that was stolen directly from Cirque du Soleil. And I had people who saw that production who were floored that we had imagined. I had a technical director who said, that's not going to work. And I said, it's going to work. And P.S., your job isn't to tell me it's not going to work. Your job is to figure out how to fucking do it. So stop being an obstacle, but I didn't say that, but that's what I thought.
That's what you thought. And I've thought that many a time myself as well. How about we try it and then tell me?
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Getting people on board in such a way that they want to tell, because nobody goes into theater because they don't love the magic of it. I did once have a meeting where I was at a theater where Everybody had gotten to this very dysfunctional place, and it happens institutionally. You may have
Yeah.
experienced it,
Oh,
where
yes.
everybody's like, we can't do that. Do we have to do that? Why do we have to? Because it was work. It takes work to make
Right.
things happen.
Yeah.
And after about 4 of those in one meeting, and the artistic director didn't say anything,
Ugh.
I said, and I kind of slammed my hand on the table and I said, we are in the business of making magic. And that's what I'm here for. We're going to make magic. And if you're not into making magic, if you're not on board for that, you need to get a different job or a different show because I'm here to make magic. So let's figure out how to do it. Right. So I don't like to be a guy who's going to slam his hand on the table and be an asshole like that. But this really goes back to a question you asked earlier, which is like, you know, we have got to have our eye on the ball. And the ball is a magical expression of human experience. And if you're not willing to get deeply human and you're not willing to work hard to make magic, then I don't want to work with you. Sorry, but that's what it is. And I understand that as a director, I can go, oh, I imagine a spacecraft taking off and it's going to have, it's going to sparkle glitter out of its ass when it flies and all this other stuff. And all that the technical people can do is think, how the fuck are we ever going to navigate that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a little different. And I don't dismiss how hard it is to do that because I've worked in scene shops.
Yeah.
I've worked in prop shops. I've been a stage manager. I've been a carpenter. I've done all those things. So I have a lot of respect for it, but I also understand it is what you signed up for. Right? If you took that job as technical director, that means you're going to be the chief magician's assistant, right?
Yeah.
Or part of the team of magicians. And if that's not what you want to do, go build decks.
You'll make more money.
You'll make a lot more money. I hate to say that, and I know I'm sounding like an autocrat, but ultimately
No.
there are certain agreements we got to walk into the room with as a director and theater makers. And fundamental is we're going to tell deeply human stories and we're going to employ every magical means we can. And magic can be really, really simple.
Yes, absolutely.
And you got to have a fucking curiosity, an enduring curiosity, and a love of theater. And otherwise, you don't get to be a director, right?
No.
It's not about power, and it's not about recognition, because in truth, you don't have a lot of power, and in a lot of ways, you don't have power. You only have what you can convince people to do, and you don't get a lot of recognition because if a show goes well, it's the actor's fault, and if it goes poorly, it's your fault. That's sort of the truism, and it's okay. I know when I look at it, if it's beautiful, I understand that I'm part of what made it beautiful. And if it's a mess, I understand I'm part of what made it a mess.
What's a show that changed your habits? What's a show that you saw that you were Joe Deere before you saw this show, and then you were a different Joe Deere after seeing this show?
God, that's an awesome question. Well, my understanding of what theater was, okay, well, I can remember as a little kid, I grew up in Florida and I lived not near, but close enough to the Oslo State Theater in Florida. Really beautiful theater. And it was a little kind of 18th century playhouse that was dismantled in Norway and transported to Sarasota by John Ringling and reassembled. And so it had these horseshoe boxes around it, and it was not a huge capacity, but it was the State Theater of Florida. And I saw many productions there. Saw a production of Waiting for Godot that I didn't understand, but I really loved. But I saw a production of Guys and Dolls, and there were 2 moments in it that knocked me over. One of them was there's this moment where one character says, "Hey, you going to the crap game?" "Yeah, which way is it?" He says, "Where is it?" "It's about 10 minutes walk." He says, "Which way?" He says, "This way." And he reaches down and opens a hatch in the stage floor that's meant to look like a a manhole cover. And he starts to step down, and then the lights change. I went, oh my God, they have a hole in the floor and they're going down into it. And that's the sewer. And then the next thing you have a big sewer. So I couldn't believe that. I just thought, holy shit, I believe it. I know that's where they're going, you know?
Yeah.
In movies, you accept that kind of stuff all the time, but live, it's breathtaking. And then the other thing was the girls, the chorus girls, are doing this number called "Take Back Your Mink," and at a certain point, they grab their dresses and they yank them, and the dresses just go pop right off, and the girls are all in these big, Merry Widow corsets and stuff like that. And I went, oh my God, they're so beautiful. I mean, I think I was probably 13 or 12, so I was profoundly tumbling all over myself about girls and women. But the idea of being able to immediately grab the audience in a way that wasn't lascivious, but that was so wittily sexy was just knocked me out. So I was a little kid when I saw that, but I kind of fell in love with what theater could do, and I associated it with musical theater. Otherwise, I was watching old movies on TV. I was watching Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly and Bill Robinson and all those people and many, many, many more. That's how I sort of came to understand what musical storytelling was about. But then I went to New York. And I saw a number of things that were very influential. And I'll tell you, there were three people who very deeply influential. One was Michael Bennett, who did the chorus line and stuff. And I saw a chorus line, and it was spectacular because he had nothing on the stage. He refused to put anything on the stage, and the entire story was filled with a kind of a simple human compositional spectacle, which you understand deeply because you're a viewpoints guy, right?
Yeah.
And so whether Bennett employed those actors in any kind of a viewpoint style shared collaboration, or whether it was just him and his co-choreographer, Bob Avian, whether that was the way it worked, I have no idea. But what I know is when I saw it, I was blown away by his ability to transform the space over and over and over again, just with bodies. And then later on, pretty close to the same time, I saw Dreamgirls, which was much more technical means employed, but no less simple spectacle. And that's a situation where it changed locations many, many times, but there wasn't a lot of scenery involved in the reimagination of the space. And I learned a lot from that. That was very instructive because I thought, I am now at this point, Adam, where if I can do a show that only has a bench and a carpet, I thank you.
Yeah,
that's all I need. Please. How much less can we have on stage?
One table, 2 chairs. That's it. That's all we're going to do.
Please, I did a production of A Little Night Music with a string quartet on stage plus a piano and 6 chairs and a bench. That was it. No, that's a big show. But so Bennett was influential, and then Gower Champion. So these are all musical theater directors, but Gower Champion was the captain, the most amazing director choreographer for creating flow, because he worked in film. He started out in film and then went into nightclubs and then finally to Broadway. Or the nightclub may have been before the film, but he understood the cinematic experience of motion on stage and the stage being disassembled and reassembled in new ways right before the audience's eyes, and that the actors, that the people involved were part of that reconstruction of the space. And it was beautiful to see. And I just thought, I want the action never to stop. I always want to feel like there's a kind of a motion to the machine of the show that keeps an audience, that there's a kind of, that you're always on the ride in a way. And then the last person was Tommy Tune. And Tommy Tune, as a director and choreographer, he tended to lean toward lighter subjects, but Nine was brilliant, Grand Hotel as well. And he's another person who said, how little can I use in order to tell an enormous story? But his craft, just his simple craft in being able to build a musical number and in being able to get me so that I am swept away, that I have this rapturous experience It's pretty fucking great. And you know who is the inheritor of all of that is Jamie Lloyd in this,
Well, I
you
was
know,
about to ask. Yeah.
did you see that Sunset Boulevard?
I did not, but I really want to. I want to like hear your thoughts on Jamie Lloyd and what he's doing with all of Weber's canon now, and him kind of saying like, "Go, take it. It needs a rehash. It
They
needs."
all do that. The old guys are, like Sondheim would like let anybody who was intelligent have at his work because he
Yeah,
wanted it to keep living.
yeah,
And all things being equal, a show that's running on Broadway is better for his reputation, better for energy and excitement around his legacy
yeah,
and money.
yeah.
Right. And they are all people, they're working artists. Those are commercial artists, whatever you want to say. So the thing about Jamie Lloyd is, I've seen some of his other stuff in tidbits, but Sunset was the first thing I saw. So, he clearly has a kind of a theatrical vocabulary that he uses over and over and over again. And so it's his point of view, and he's unapologetic about it. And it's like we're going to create a kind of a void into which we'll introduce some elements. It's very, very tightly prescribed set of elements that he'll use, in Sunset, because it was a story about a film star in a film industry, them filming this on stage and you seeing the action played out live and on screen at the same time was very exciting. And his stripping away costume spectacle, scenic spectacle, and making the spectacle about this kind of a barren existence where people float in darkness, where they seem to be isolated, so deeply isolated in darkness with just patches of light in this almost expressionistic way. I found it thrilling. It didn't always work, but it worked a lot. I don't think it's the great show. I mean, Nicole Scherzinger, who starred in that, was
Of
my
course,
student,
of course.
and I love her, and she's a very kind person. So I wanted her to be good in it, but I was not prepared for what I saw. I mean, it was one of those performances. You said these performances that change you. I saw Diana Rigg play Medea,
Oh,
and it was a brilliant production. And it seemed so absolutely fresh and of the moment, but she blew me away. It felt like time stopped in the theater. And I felt that with Nicole as well. I couldn't believe that this was a person that I knew,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which is to see an artist achieve that level of mastery and ability to keep an audience in the palm of her hand so that they couldn't breathe because of the human experience that she was having. And that comes from Jamie Lloyd, according to her. It comes from Jamie Lloyd, from his clarity of vision. I don't think every show works that way, and I think he tends to want every show to work that way. So some of them are gonna hit and some of them are gonna miss. But again, it goes back to this thing about we talked about with Daniel Fish. I'm fine. Try it.
yeah,
Try
yeah,
it. You
yeah,
know what? Nobody's gonna get hurt.
yeah.
Everything doesn't have to be a world-changing, life-defining, or genre or art form defining experience. Sometimes a bit of it will work. Sondheim, who I have such respect for, he's one of the most important artists in my life. He wrote a lot of shows that were 80% good, 80% fucking brilliant,
Yeah,
and 20% that just didn't work.
yeah.
But you know what? 80% of Sondheim brilliance
It is
is
better
better than
than.
most people's
Yeah,
100% working at the
exactly.
top of their game.
Yeah,
There's not
absolutely.
many people who can do that. So I will take the little broken spots because of what else you get with it, and that's probably true for Jamie Lloyd. I don't know. Have you seen any of his work yet?
No, I'm looking forward to it, but everybody keeps on telling me when I was putting out a call to say like, who should I have on the podcast? They're like Jamie Lloyd, Jamie Lloyd. I was like, I don't have a contact for him, but okay,
Yeah.
I will work my way up to Jamie Lloyd.
I lived in New York for 12 years, and I started as a dancer, and then as I began directing, I became a stage manager so I could be in the room with good directors
Yeah,
and learn more about it, and it was a good idea. I did learn a lot. But when you live in New York or a major market, or you have yourself oriented toward that sort of like the big star on the horizon, It means that you are focused on any job anywhere, and most especially jobs with bright lights like New York, London, Los Angeles, Berlin, Paris, those kind of places, right?
Yeah.
And you could probably name other world cities that are similar, but there's a small handful. So that's the fancy jobs. And somehow it's easy, or I convinced myself as a young person that unless my career was in that arena, it wasn't valid or not
Mm,
as valid. And when I left New York City to go to grad school, I had a feeling I was never going to move back. I cried
mm,
driving that U-Haul across the George Washington Bridge, leaving after 12 years, because
yeah.
I'd worked hard to build a New York career, and I had a New York career. I mean, I did what I wanted to do, and I could have stayed a stage manager, but not a director. But
Yeah.
I could have stayed a stage manager there, but it was more important that I follow being an artist. But what I have learned over the years since then is that all theater is local, except those big market jobs. Those are tourist
Yeah. Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
And you and I go to New York to see Waiting for Godot or whatever it is we're gonna see, right? But we're tourists, we're arts tourists. But when you do theater in North Carolina, or you do theater in any of the cities in the world you've directed, and I do theater here in Dayton or regionally, or even in Matera in the south of Italy or wherever else I've directed internationally, those are always local. And it means I am speaking personally to the audience, many of whom I know. I go to the grocery store here and I see people who have been in the audience for shows that I've directed, and I know them and I know their lives and they know my life. And so my relationship as a theater maker and there as an audience is very personal and it's very small. It's geographically small, and it will probably never be in the New York Times again. And I'm okay with that. In fact, I'm great with that. I am fine to recognize that if my show is wildly successful, 1,000 people will ever see it. And maybe 1,000 people, depending on the venue, right? And that's got to be wonderful. That's got to be enough. And I have to learn to love that. If you want everyone to see your work, you got to direct films and TV, right? That's
Yeah.
gotta be how you do it, but
Yeah.
that's not where I went, and so I am in love with the idea that I'm gonna tell a story for people around my campfire from my village, and when I look across the fire, I can see in their eyes that they understand the story, and that our experience, our shared experience of losing a child as an adult, or going through a divorce, or the joyous experience that we shared of watching some young people succeed in what they were trying to do. I see in their eyes and we share that thing together. That's got to be the satisfaction, right? A
Yeah.
little bit of money, and mostly the satisfaction of telling a story to people for whom it matters. And I know them, and that what I put on the stage resonates with them specifically. And I know how to calibrate the story to their experience, not pander, but calibrate. You know what I mean? That is the experience of being a director from my point of view, and I'm still like the luckiest guy in the world that this is the art form that I fell into, that I discovered I loved, which I think I loved from the time I began. I wanted to dance, and I loved that I got to dance and tell stories that way. But when I discovered that there's this thing called directing where you are making the story, all of it happen in some way, I just felt like I discovered my lifelong, I'll be a director until I can't.
Same.
I bet that's true.
Yep.
I bet that's true. Yeah. So,
Boom. Joe Deere, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I
Adam,
mean, what a great
I'm
way to end it there. You have been, whether we have been in touch or not, you have been a huge influence in me. And I'm in Pajama Game or Cabaret, and I'm going, God, what would Joe do here?
yeah, but better is what would Adam do?
Well, I'm finding my way. I'm finding my way with some things, but I find myself in an institution now where at some point they are going to ask me to direct a musical again, and I know that they're all geared toward, the kids are all geared toward Broadway or LA,
Yeah,
and
they are. And that's but you
that's
know what, like,
okay.
that's a good place. I don't think, if you're not ambitious for what you can see,
Of course, yeah,
then I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand. But however, when you get older, I think you discover that there are other
Yeah.
ways to do it. And they're
Yeah.
not more noble,
No.
but you know,
But
like,
I'm glad you spoke to that because, yeah, I mean, my career path, I looked at the regional theater and I looked at the ladder and I said, that's not for me. I don't want
yeah,
that. And so I went another way, and it was a very hard way, and there's no path. I was forging that path there, but like there's theater everywhere.
yeah.
People want story. People want to be in physical proximity with people to have that story. And the fact that you're saying that like your campfire and your village is where you're happiest telling the story now. I love that analogy.
But,
I love that.
I mean, I've been here for this is my 29th year in Dayton, which I never imagined I would. I mean, I
Right.
thought Dayton, Ohio was a punchline to a farmer's daughter joke, but of course, it's where the people are that I know and love. And you've been a nomadic person. And so at some point, you may have discovered that you wanted more longer term relationships with the people
Community.
around you.
Yeah.
Yeah, community. But if people ask me, and there's a reason I want to do it, whether it's the story or the people I get to work with, or a thing that I find myself loving now is the idea of um, working with new people, working with new communities, and sort of discovering what is it that we can do together and what do we share, Anyway. So listen, God, I've gone on and on. I'm sorry.
No, that's fantastic. And the audience is going to love it as well because you're fantastic. And thank you again for this.
Awesome.
If this episode gave you any insight, inspiration, or even just made you smile, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts for more conversations like this. And if you're looking for guidance with a creative challenge or want to advance a dream of your own, we'd love to help. Visit boardofdirectors.world. The Board of Directors is a global constellation of theater directors dedicated to building community, sharing knowledge, and transforming the role of the director in the 21st century. We convene and curate a fellowship that fosters mentorship, artistic inquiry, and collective care, transcending borders and institutions and traditions. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.